Just as an introduction for ComEd, if you're not from this area, ComEd service territory covers most of northern Illinois for our distribution system. These are distribution power lines. We cover most of northern Illinois, and we have 3.8 million electric customers, and we have about 35,000 miles of overhead line that we manage to keep trees clear of these lines. Our transmission system are the tower lines. Those actually cover more territory. Those go between power stations and carry electricity from state to state and between substations. And we have about 5,000 miles of transmission right-of-way that we have in our service territory. Just as a general information before we get started on the real topic, just as a headline here, is that our transmission system, these are the tower lines that run in right-of-ways, and these take electricity from power stations to substations, and they're subject to state and federal regulations. There's absolutely no tolerance for vegetation to come into conflict with these types of power lines, and that's because it can have wide-reaching effects. The Northeast blackout in 2003 caused an outage to over 45 million customers, and that was a result of a tree. And so after that, there were a lot of regulations put into place for transmission rights of way, and so we don't allow trees underneath these types of lines. You can have small shrubs, and you can have prairie grasses or super underneath these, but no trees are allowed in these areas. This talk is mainly going to focus on the distribution system. The distribution system are those lines that really travel from substations out to your homes and businesses. And whether they're large or small, these are the lines you commonly see throughout your communities. They're in the rear lots, along the alleys, along the streets, and the management of these lines is subject to state regulation. These lines can serve from 1 customer to 3,000 customers. So if you have an outage on a line like this, it can affect thousands of customers or just a few customers. So it's really important that we keep the vegetation away from these lines. So we already heard today a lot about national storm impact, so I'm pretty much just going to click through these billion-dollar storm impact. But as far as the cost on the grid, there's actually a lot of cost to actually the loss of power to a community when the power goes out. Factories aren't operating, people can't go to work, people lose food. There's a lot of impact to the community when the power goes out. And you can see that there's a range of costs, but they're really high costs. Billions and billions of dollars are lost annually because of power outages. And we heard about the storms in the Northeast. Superstorm Sandy brought national attention to utility storm response in 2012, with millions of people without power and with that for multiple days. As a result of that, again, we also heard about legislative impact because of storms and because of these major storms. And several states have put into place legislation for utilities to manage vegetation because of the storm impact and the importance that they're placing now on the ability for electric companies to provide safe and reliable power to their customers. And storm hardening is come up as a term that you now see in the literature. These are headlines I pulled right off of my desk from magazines that I had from the Utility Arborist Association and from Transmission and Distribution World magazine. Storm hardening can be done by equipment upgrades, and it can be done by moving substations out of flood zones, things like that. Those are all things that we can do to prevent storm impact at utilities. So at ComEd specifically, I'm going to talk, the rest of the talk's really going to be focusing on ComEd and our experience here. So we really have had several years of high impact storms. And this chart shows at the top of the screen has all of our outages at ComEd. So for 2011, 2012, and 2013, all the outages. So in 2013, there were 34,600 outages that affected 3.7 million customers. Now, ComEd has 3.8 million customers. So in total, 3.7 million customers. Now, several customers could have had multiple, and some could have had zero. But on average, about one customer, every customer had one outage last year. 2012, 4.4 million customers. In 2011, 5.9 million customer outages. And 2011, if you remember, was a very bad storm year for us. And I'll talk about that a little bit. Now, as far as the tree outages, trees are causing about 20% of all outages at ComEd. And the customers affected last year, 584,000 customers had outages that were caused by trees specifically. Now, when you go down here, this section is storm outages. So these are all, and this is just storms specifically. So customers affected by storms in last year was 1 million customers were affected by storms last year. And 317,000 customers were impacted by trees during storms last year. So during storms, about 40% of the outages are caused by trees. Now I heard, I can't remember your name, Mark say that in Connecticut, 90% of the outages were caused by trees. And we really are spending a lot of money to restore the power when the power goes out. And the tree-caused outages alone, overall, as an average, cost about $50 million to restore power due to tree-caused outages annually. So it's costing us a lot of money to restore power, and it's really affecting a lot of customers. So this is the 2011 storm, and you can see the storm damage. This was one of the worst storms we've had in our history. July 11th, 2011 will live in infamy in my life. But we had major storm damage. The wind came through over 90 miles an hour. It was a derecho event, and it impacted over 900,000 customers. But that was actually after having numerous storms before that. We actually had a storm on June 21st that affected 419,000 customers. And this is actually showing the duration of the outages. So the customers without power and how many days it took to get their power back on. So the June 21st storm, we had about 400,000 customers out and total. And it took about 5 days to get them all restored, but most customers were restored in 3 days. The July 11th storm, it took up to 7 days to restore customers from that storm. It was a massive storm. So the reaction to customers, the public, regulators, and everybody else was really bad. And I wish I had the headlines to put on here because we heard it. We heard it from everybody that they didn't like having their power out, and they didn't like how long it took us to restore their power. And it was really wasn't a fun time to work there. But we have made a lot of changes since then. And so some of the things we're doing, we're preventing outages. So the Energy Infrastructure Modernization Act was passed, and through that bill, we actually have funding to do some upgrades to our facilities. We're putting in smart switches. We're replacing a lot of our poles. We're doing storm hardening and equipment changes, and we are doing some enhanced tree trimming. We're also improving our restoration. So every year we've had a storm restoration improvement teams, and they put into place changes that will help us restore power more efficiently. Additionally, we've really improved the communication to our stakeholders during storms. And as the storm is coming in and as we're restoring power, we've put into place a lot of things that we can do to keep our stakeholders informed. We have with our municipalities, with county governments, legislators, and also with our call center. We have our website upgrades. If you ever go on ComEd.com, we have an outage map on there, and you can actually click on your neighborhood, see what the outage is, what the likely cause is, and how long it might take to restore the power. And all that has happened since the storms in 2011. So then move to 2014, the big storm we had this year was June 30th. And the June 30th storm, we had 2 derechos come through. We had 7 tornadoes in our service territory, and there were over 79,000 lightning strokes in our service territory. And each of the blue dots on the map is a lightning stroke. So that is, I mean, it was insane with the amount of lightning that we had in the territory. Approximately 430,000 customers had outages in this storm. This is a kind of a poster that our reliability and analysis group put together with a ton of information. But on this picture, you can see the number of where the customers were out of power. So where it's red is where a high percentage of the customers didn't have power. So you can kind of see in the city and the south suburbs was the hardest hit by the storm with the number of customers that were out of service. You can see this big limb came down. The guys, they're restoring the power here. Tornado took poles down. Again, we're showing the lightning activity with Storm 1 and Storm 2. And then this chart shows how long it took us to restore power. And we really were pretty good at being able to restore the electricity here a lot faster. We were able to, on Monday, 21% of the storm hit Monday. What was it, Sunday? By Monday, we had 21% of the customers restored. Tuesday, we had 72% of the customers restored. And by Wednesday, 93% of the customers were restored. But it took us about 3 days to get that last 7% of the customers restored. And really that's because of the level and amount of damage in those hardest hit areas. And we try and restore the most customers first. So we'll pick up the main feeder lines and then we work down to the smaller number of customers because we're trying to get those customers picked up and make the biggest impact to our communities. But it did take us up to 5 days to restore those very last customers in that storm. And this is an example of some of the damage we saw in the storm. Looks like it must have been a nice included bark there. Looks like really major damage. I didn't see a power line in this picture, but that's just, totally devastated area there. So during this storm, we actually had better performance than we would have had we not made some improvements to our system. Because of those smart switches, it's called distribution automation, we were actually able to avoid outages to 75,000 customers. So 75,000 customers did not have an outage because of those switches. And what those do is if a tree comes down or some other thing happens, lightning strikes, a wire comes down, it actually reroutes power and doesn't affect some of the customers. It kind of shuts it down to a specific area so that some of the people don't get their power affected. So they were able to avoid 75,000 customer outages because of those switches. But our storm hardening activities were able to avoid outages for about 27,000 customers. And some of those storm hardening solutions are what's called spacer cable. And I got a picture here of kind of how that's hung. And what it is a steel messenger and then coated wire that we've put in. We've started using this. We didn't used to use this at ComEd. We started using this in about 2012 in areas with high tree densities where we're concerned that trees could come down and come and take the wire down. And it has been effective. You can see in this picture, the tree came down, but the power is still on. It's not an end-all, be-all. I mean, if a huge tree comes down, it's going to take it down, it's going to break the poles, and there's going to be a problem. But in some cases, it can make an area less prone to an outage when there is a tree failure. But we don't use this, and it's used in special situations. But we are doing storm hardening for vegetation management. We were actually able to avoid 17,000 customers from having an outage because of the work we've done in our department for enhanced vegetation management. So we think that's a success. So preventing tree-caused outages. Typically we have, most utilities have a preventive maintenance program. And at ComEd, we've been on a 4-year trimming cycle since 1999. And our pruning clearances are based on the tree species, those characteristics of the tree species like growth rate. And then another thing we look at is where the tree is in relation to the power line, the type of line it is, the voltage of the line, and also that 4 years length. So we're trimming for 4 years of growth on the tree. And this is an example right out of the Best Management Practices book for utility tree pruning. We're pruning branches back to the main trunk so that the tree can grow for another 4 years. And this is a tip example of what tree pruning might look like when we're done with line clearance activities. In transmission, again, they also have preventive programs. They're paying attention to the way the wires would move, and we also have to keep a clear distance because it's such high voltage. But again, it's about preventing outages. This is what you might see when after a transmission line has been cleared, and you'll have just grass underneath, and then you'll have the sidewall of trees. But when we have storm damage to trees, this isn't something that our typical maintenance programs prevent. We have trees that break over from the side and bring the wires down. This whole tree came over. Can you see the pole in the transformer there? And the whole tree came over. And this one, the tree had been pruned to the side of the lines, but we have a branch that came down there. And in this one, it looks like a big section of the crown broke out of that Siberian elm. So utility companies are really trying to make changes to make the grid more resilient. And since trees cause about 40% of the storm outages at ComEd, we really do have to look at vegetation management as a solution for preventing storm-related outages. And the other thing is that storm outages, the tree-related outages cause damage that takes longer to repair. So, when a tree comes down and takes down the wire and breaks 4 poles in a row, in the backyard, that takes a long time to repair. So if we can prevent that outage, then that's going to improve our customer's experience. That customer wouldn't have to have an outage. And ComEd stakeholders are really demanding that improvement. We hear it. Our customers want better performance from us. And so we have to look deeper at what type of tree damage is causing power outages. So at ComEd, every outage gets a cause code. When the outage is restored, the troubleman puts in a code. And when the tree-related codes that are available are broken limb or trunk, uprooted tree, tree contact, and vines. And typically, we define tree contact as tree branches that have grown into the lines. But our department then takes a look at that every morning, and we look at certain outages. We actually send an arborist out to take a look at those locations. Not all of them, but a good percentage. If they hit a certain threshold, a number of customers, if it's been within a certain amount of time since we last trimmed in that area, we want to know what's causing that outage. We also want to prevent, maybe that tree's still there, the troubleman took it off because it was the middle of the night, but he couldn't see that the whole tree was coming over. So we take a look at that, we want to get out and take care of that. But we also gather a lot of data. We want to look at what is causing the outages on our system so that we can make program improvements. We can see what's happening on our system and do something about it. So, how do trees cause power outages? At ComEd, based on our investigation data, about 83% of the outages are caused by broken limb or trunks. And about 9% are being caused by uprooted trees. And tree growth is causing only about 9% of the outages. I gotta figure out how to do this. And then if we leave out the tree contact outages, tree failure is accounting for about the whole trunk failure is accounting for about 16%. Broken limbs from above the wires is causing about 39% of the power outages. Broken limbs from the side are causing 35% of the outages. And about 78% of the broken branches that are breaking are healthy, not dead. So, if we want to make improvements, we got to look at branches that are above the wires and to the side of the wires that are alive. Those are the branches that are breaking and falling and causing outages. Now, if you look at the proximity of the power lines, where are these trees breaking from? About 40% are within 10 feet. About 39% are from 10 to 20% away, 10 to 11 to 20 feet away, and about 21% are more than 20 feet away. And then if for uprooted trees, over 50% are from more than 20 feet away. So the zone where we're normally trimming trees, that's really not where the broken limbs are coming from. They're coming from outside that area. And the uprooted trees are coming from farther away into the side of our power lines. And then when we look at tree species, and I know that the species are getting kind of crazy over there, but we've got Siberian elm trees and silver maple trees causing a huge percentage of our outages. I know it comes as no surprise to those of us from this area, but it's really, it's more than we actually have in the population. Those are kind of common species out there in our urban forest, but it's more than we've got in the urban forest. They're driving the outages. The other ones that are high drivers are weeping willows, cottonwoods, ash, box elder, white oak, mulberry, and American elm. Now, I'll say that our ash, this number of 6%, it's basically a 3-year average is the 6%, but it hasn't gone up yet. I haven't seen it go up yet. Well, but the assumption is that they'll fall and hit the lines. Because again, most of our outages are caused by broken limbs. They're not caused by trees growing into the wires. So, ComEd's storm hardening program. So what we've put into place using this data, I really got to hurry. So in specific areas with storm-related outages, we are sending people out to do inspections and level 2 risk assessments of the trees in those areas. They use the results of that investigation data that we just talked about, plus more, because I didn't go that in depth with it, but they're using that to determine what to do about the trees in that area. We are mitigating the risk in that certain area by pruning the trees or sometimes removing them, depending on the situation of the tree. And we're calling this our Enhanced Vegetation Management Program. And this is some examples of what we're doing, where we're actually pruning the overhanging branches, really clearing out this area above the wires. In this case, this tree had to be removed in order to keep it, if we had pruned it, it would not have been viable, so we needed to remove it. So again, based on the results of that work, in our June 30th storm, we were able to prevent about 17,000 customers from having an outage based on the work that we're doing here. Other utilities, we heard about what's going on in Connecticut. Some utilities are really just focusing on a hazard tree program. Other utilities are just saying, hey, go ground to sky. Everywhere you go, it's ground to sky, which means you trim all the branches all the way up, you look up, and it's ground to sky. Other utilities are actually getting on a cycle. We've been on a cycle. Some utilities haven't been on a tree pruning cycle, and they're really overgrown. So some utilities just have to get on a cycle to even start getting somewhere. But ComEd has actually been, we're actually first quartile in the number of customers having outages because of trees. So the number of outages based on trees on an everyday basis, we're first quartile performance. We're doing a good job for it's called SAFE. But we've got to do better. There's always room to do better, and that's what our customers demand. So recommendations. You've probably seen this 100 times, maybe more, but this is the Arbor Day Foundation's recommendations for tree planting near power lines, the right tree, right place. And this shows the tree pruning, the area where to plant small trees, trees under 25 feet in height, or shrubs. Sometimes shrubs are going to be much more appropriate for an area rather than a tree. But we tend to focus on right underneath the lines. But I want to draw your attention to the fact that this zone goes 20 feet out. And if we could keep these smaller trees in the 20-foot zone, that would be helpful, because remember, we looked at the data and it's showing that the trees in that area are what's causing our power outages. Here's some examples of some really nice crabapple trees, just slightly offset from the power lines. And here's some more that are planted, and those look great. We're happy to see those. But yep, going back to that data is these trees that are in the 11 to 20 feet and then more than 20 feet away are still causing us power outages. So I want to draw your attention to the medium trees and encourage you, when you're planting trees, look to the side, get underneath the lines, take your paces out, make sure that you've looked at all of the options for planting in those areas, and focus on some medium-sized trees, because if you have these tall trees right next to the power lines, I mean, these are trees that have been pruned back for utility clearance. But if these trees break, you know where they're going on those lines, and people are going to have an outage. So, we're planting trees for the future. We're not doing this so that tomorrow the trees look good. We plant trees so that in 50 years we have a good urban forest. So we've got to look at this from a resiliency standpoint. This whole tree, this actually was last week, we had to have 2 cranes out here to take this tree off the lines. But focus in on some medium-sized trees that you can plant in that medium zone, so that from a resiliency standpoint, we want to make the grid more resilient, and we want to make the urban forest more resilient. And so if we look at the appropriate species to plant near power lines, that will really help us out, and it'll help out everybody that's a member of the community. I want to put in a plug for Jake and his team for explaining what to do for maintaining trees. We want to encourage people to maintain their own trees and help their trees be more resilient in storms. And in addition to that, after a storm, we want to really encourage you as property owners, you as tree managers, to inspect your trees after a storm, and make sure that you take action to mitigate any broken branches that are up in the crowns of the trees. We actually see a pretty good number of outages following a storm. So it doesn't just happen at the storm. Trees continue to shed the branches after the storm. They crack, and then the next time the wind blows a little bit, the whole branch will come down, and we'll have another outage in that area. If there is a direct risk to the power line, please contact your utility company. If you're here at ComEd, contact us at ComEd so that we can send somebody out to look at it and advise as to next steps. But this is a brochure from the ISA on weathering the storm, and those are available through the ISA. So again, in summary, our customers have really high expectations of utility companies. Trees are causing a lot of power outages. They're a high driver of power outages at ComEd, and we continue to make a lot of improvements. And we're using data-driven practices to improve the performance of delivery of electricity to our customers. And you all can help too if we plant compatible trees, encourage good tree care, and we do inspections after the fact.